Welcome to today's Q&A, and today we're going to talk about a very important topic that I know a lot of you are interested in, and we're going to talk about selecting embryos for transfer. How do you know which embryo to select? And with us, we have Dr. Christos. He graduated in medicine in Greece, specialized in Germany, and now you are in Spain, in Alicante, with IVF-Spain. Welcome, Dr. Christos.
Welcome, Andrea. Hello. Thank you. Thank you to have the chance to be with you today and also to speak to your audience. I'm very happy. I'm very happy to be part of it.
So let's maybe start with the basics from the beginning for those patients who maybe are very new to the process. What is embryo transfer?
Embryo transfer is a very simple thing, or it sounds simple. It's the transport of the embryo in the womb of the woman after a treatment, for example, after stimulation.
Okay, so we're talking about IVF, and we have an embryo that is being transported, like you mentioned, into the uterus.
Into the cavity of the uterus, exactly.
So there's
under ultrasound control, so
okay,
that we know exactly where to place the embryo. It's not trivial. We must have, at the whole time of the transfer, a perfect view to be sure that the embryo is implanted on the right spot.
Okay, yeah, because the embryo is so tiny, we can't really see it without a microscope, isn't it?
Exactly.
So you have the ultrasound scan, so you know exactly in the uterus where it's going to be positioned. And
also our embryologists do a tricky thing, a very interesting thing, that put an air bubble inside of the pipe. So the only thing that we recognize to be sure where the embryo is it's on the scan this air bubble, and we can see it as a white spot.
Yeah, so when you know that the air bubble has left the catheter, you know that the embryo is inside in the right place where you want it to be.
Exactly, and after that, after we perform transfer, our embryologist take a second look into this pipe and confirm that the embryo is in the womb and not in the pipe.
And all the steps that it takes us to this moment of embryo transfer, you know, how do we end up with having an embryo to be transferred? What are the steps of that process?
The first step is to start the preparation. For example, in some cases, it's necessary to give some additional medicaments to the woman so that we increase a little bit the quality. After that, we start with actual stimulation. Depending on the age, depending on the former cycles, we choose the medicaments that are suitable for this woman. And in a rhythm of 2-3 days, we do controls. We see how the follicle progress, if they develop properly, and then we trigger the ovulation, do the egg retrieval, and after the egg retrieval, we have the fertilization of the eggs with the sperms of the husband or partner, and then we prepare to let the embryos develop to day 5. To day 5, and then it's the transfer.
Okay, so let's go to the beginning of that process. It seems quite a long process, several steps. So you mentioned optimizing the egg quality, and then stimulation and collecting the eggs. On average, how many eggs can a couple get from a stimulated cycle?
Sorry, it depends from the egg reserve. Also, and the egg reserve includes 3 main factors. The one is age, then the other one is the AMH, and then also the follicle count.
Okay.
We know that not every cycle is the same. Some cycle is suitable for stimulation, some cycle is not suitable. So before starting the stimulation, we control if it's a good idea, it's a good thing now to proceed. So regarding, for example, the egg reserve, the AMH level, we can expect also more eggs. If the AMH level is very, very low, then the OOC yield in the end of the process will be quite low.
So it's important to have those checks, and that will give us an understanding on average how many eggs we can have. That's
the first thing what I ask the couples, how your egg reserves before starting any attempt, to know where we are and to give them a good picture of the situation, and not to start blindfolded to do things.
So let's say either we have lots of eggs or a small amount of eggs. Does that relate to the quality of those eggs, or is that something that we're going to assess in the next stage of how do they fertilize, do they develop? How do we know?
We are not 100% sure that the outcome, or be more precise, that a high AMH or a high OOC yield goes hand in hand with the quality of eggs. It can be the case that we have many eggs, but they get not fertilized at the sperms of the husband. It can be a mixed problem. There's a problem from the sperms, so we don't know exactly. For sure, we must try it one time to see where we go, which is the direction where we go. But after the fertilization, it's a process. It's a process. We watch the embryos, how they develop, and we're very fortunate to have here excellent embryologists to help us in this process, and with criteria that we adjust, we see if those embryos are suited or not. And also, if one of those embryos reaches day 5, it's a quality criterion. It's a quality criterion because only the strongest reaches day 5.
And during that process of developing to day 3, day 5, how important is the incubator or the medium, that process where they are just laying there waiting to grow?
It's very important. It's very important because it's a smaller part in the whole procedure. The main part is the quality of the eggs, their own quality of the eggs, but also a good lab, a good incubator, also skilled personnel, skilled embryologists are the key for success.
And so we are waiting for the embryos to become ready for transfer. And is there a difference between transferring them on day 3 or day 5, or is it best to wait to day 5?
It's a huge difference. It's a huge difference. Success rates with day 5 embryos are much higher. Know that if one embryo reaches day 5, we have a pregnancy rate around 70%. And the success rate on day 3 is quite low, quite lower also. And one reason for that is that between day 3 and day 5, we have 2 additional days of development. And the embryos, let's say that don't evolve to day 5, are included in this pool of potential embryos that I would transfer to a woman. So it's like missing a step. So we prefer, if it's possible, to transfer only day 5.
Only day 5. And in that process, let's say if we have 5, 6, 10 eggs that have grown to day 5, who is responsible for monitoring, tracking the development of those embryos, and then selecting which one is the one that should be transferred first?
I'm very happy that you asked me this question, because we can also tell the importance of a good lab and of good embryologist, and I'm quite happy to have here who can shoulder the responsibility. And we are in daily contact with our embryologist. We look together how the development of the embryos is, and decide together if the embryos are suited or not.
And at the same time, I imagine that you're probably also monitoring the woman's uterus to see if it's ready to receive the embryo as well. So is that a process that happens at the same time?
Yes, it depends also if we transfer fresh or frozen.
Yeah.
If we transfer fresh, yes, the conditions in the womb must be perfect to transfer one embryo. The lining must be proper. The progesterone level must be okay before transferring one of those precious embryos.
Yeah.
So it's very important. We perform scans during the procedure to see if the endometrium, the lining, is suitable or not.
So thinking that the endometrium is ready and we have several embryos ready to be transferred, can you tell us a bit about the criteria of how do we choose? I know that in the old days, it used to be just a microscope. The embryologist will look and see if it looks good. But today there's AI, machine learning, all of these techniques that can help us make that decision. How does it work?
Most important still is a skilled embryologist, because the technology can help you until a point. And but further from this point, a skilled eye is necessary. And we have, for example, time-lapse. It's magnificent technology. We can see the development of the embryos day by day, and that allow us to choose only the strongest embryos that looks the best. But as I said before, the embryologists are skilled embryologists. It's the ace in our sleeve.
Yeah. So those embryologists have now that ability to have images of the whole process of the development. And I think that's such a useful thing to have, instead of just basing their decision in a one moment visualization.
Exactly. And also, not only the embryologist, also the couples. Because we can, one thing that I love is that it's a transparent process. We show our couples how the development of the embryos goes day by day, so that they can also understand the process, understand why we chosen those embryos and the others was not suitable for transfer.
So is there a difference in the way they look and the quality of their embryo as well? And is there any way that we could analyze, because maybe it doesn't look so good, but maybe it is good inside, you know? How do we know? What can we do about it?
That's a very good question. The thing is that we can rely on the appearance until one point, but some aneuploidies exist that also appear good, and we would normally transfer them. Nobody can be sure that this embryo, without the genetic testing of the embryo, is a healthy embryo. And so, back to your question, the only test that allow us to say if this embryo is healthy or not is euploid, with the proper amount of chromosomes, 46, is a genetic test, PGT-A.
Yeah. So it's useful to do that test as well, because if we have, let's say, 8, 10 embryos, and they all look good, we could potentially be transferring several embryos first that aren't chromosomically normal before we transfer the one. And it's the emotional toll of going through loss after loss after loss as well.
And it's exactly like that. You know, I was working for a long time as a consultant. I'm still working as a consultant in Germany, and day by day you see exactly this. Couples had miscarriages, and those miscarriages, they're besides of the emotional torture, is also a waste of time, and to one point also a waste of money.
Yeah.
If they undergo a treatment plan. So this genetic testing is a test that I recommend to all of my patients, most because we know that the unemployment rate also increases with age. If a woman is 20 years old, around 70% of the embryos that she generates are healthy. When a woman is 35, 50% of the embryos are healthy, diploid, proper amount of chromosomes. When a woman is 40, 20% of those blastocysts, day 5 embryos are healthy. When she's over 43, less than 10%. So to accrue the unhealthy embryos, the best thing is to do a PGTA so that we avoid transferring embryos that are not healthy.
Yeah, and that genetic screening, it works like a small biopsy, so we're taking some cells of the embryo, isn't it?
It's a very delicate procedure. It's a very delicate procedure. Many couples have big fear that during this procedure we will injure the embryo. One thing that I can tell them is that we take 2 or 3 cells out of over 250, and those cells belong not to the embryo; they belong to the future placenta. So we take them, those 2 or 3 cells, on day 5 of development, and we analyze them.
Yeah.
So after 3 weeks, approximately 3 weeks, we know exactly if, for example, embryo 1, 3, or 5 are healthy or not.
Yeah, so it's not likely that that procedure in itself is going to damage the embryo by itself.
It can be.
Yeah.
It can be that we have that it can happen that the embryo will not develop after those procedures, but it's very, very low. It's lower than it's the survival rate is something like over 95%.
Yeah, I was reading a few months ago about a new genetic testing procedure where they were doing it non-invasively, so without removing the cells. So maybe there's new things coming that can also be quite interesting.
For sure, day by day, new things, new tools appear to help us and also the couples.
And what happened to the embryos that weren't selected for transfer? Either they were good, but they weren't the first chosen, or maybe they weren't looking really good. They weren't good enough.
Yeah, strict classification, a very strict classification that allow us to be clear if those embryos are suited or not suited. It's a clear line.
Okay.
All this, we transfer the best looking embryo if we didn't have performed genetic testing, okay, in this case, and the other suitable embryos, they will be frozen and wait for a new transfer. All those embryos that are not suited to transfer because the quality is poor, and they will be discharged. We are through them. If we have performed a genetic testing, then it's more clear how we will proceed. Those who are employed are all suited to transfer, and those who are not employed or unemployed will be also outruled.
And the ones that are left frozen, how long can they be frozen for? I think it might be different in Spain and the UK, how long the embryos can be left cryopreserved.
They can cryopreserve for a very long period. If I'm not mistaken, it's something like 50 years.
Yeah, I think that's here in the UK, they are allowed to be for over 50 years if we are preserving them for medical reasons. But I think if it's for social reasons, it's a less amount of time, which people are trying to fight against, because there's no scientific reasoning saying that the eggs or the embryos are not good after 10 years. They last a long time.
They last a long time, and we are very, very skilled in freezing and thawing embryos.
Mm-hmm.
So also the survival rate in this process is very, very high, something like 97, 98%. So the embryos survive this procedure because they're reploid, they're very strong, and it's a magnificent procedure.
And Dr. Christos, I understand that this process can seem quite complex for patients who maybe never thought that they would have to undergo fertility treatment. What kind of information and support are patients given throughout this process of getting those embryos and then selecting them and then thinking about leftover embryos? What kind of information and support do they get?
Couples that are working with us, they experience one thing, and we are very proud of it, is that all this procedure is very, very transparent. Me and all of my colleagues were very straightforward about the procedure, where we are, where we go, and what's the step after the next step. So during the whole procedure, it's an open book. They know everything.
And I know you have an amazing team as well of patient coordinators, nurses, doctors, everyone available to talk to the patients as well.
Exactly, and also we offer free consultation to speak with me or with one of the other doctors to speak about the situation and also to answer questions regarding the whole process.
Dr. Christos, thank you so much for speaking to us today and answering all these questions about embryos for transfer.
It was a pleasure.